people are coming up after these gigs and saying, I'm afraid to express what you expressed. Thank you for doing it. I'm almost at the point where I feel comfortable, but I lost a couple of friends and some relatives who won't talk to me anymore. I was like, well, what did you say? The person might have said something as innocuous as, I'm not convinced that there aren't biological differences between men and women. And you're trying to imagine a world in which this constitutes a controversial position. Of course, what's really going on is that people are very worried about what the consequences are of simply observing reality. So, for example, if you observe that there's a lot of discussion around immigration, which synonymizes any desire to hold a border with being somehow afraid of other cultures. That's a crazy position to be in, because almost everybody agrees that borders are important, that citizenship matters, and that not everybody can be a citizen of every country. Yet, somehow, to voice even something so simple as I want a border and I may want fewer immigrants rather than more immigrants, that person is now held up as if they've said something about their own sense of their country's superiority and jingoist. They're confused for being jingoistic or xenophobic or anything like this. So we've gotten to a completely crazy state whereby people who hold absolutely garden variety, common sense viewpoints are seeing themselves reflected in the media as if in a funhouse mirror. And they're seeing themselves come back so distorted and ugly that they're asking, like, oh, what just happened? I fell asleep for a few years and I wake up Rip Van Winkle style, and I'm in a world in which suddenly I'm the bad guy for simply holding very commonplace ideas. Now, those people are so excited to see conversations taking place with decency, with comity and equanimity, so that these positions are not held in an ugly fashion, but they're simply seeing a conversation take place that they remember or that they dreamed was possible, and they're not seeing it reflected anywhere else. And I think that's what's really exciting is that the IDW conversation is the public front of a national conversation that is bizarrely taking place in hushed whispers with people metaphorically living in closets, not ready to jump out and declare, hey, I have some beliefs that you are going to find shocking, but to me are absolutely garden variety beliefs. What I believe is that you've starved people for any ability to make a very simple point, right? So for example, imagine that we analogized a country to a house. And the key question was, should we allow people to come for dinner, like a visitor? So that would be like a tourist visa or a temporary worker visa. So now we have an issue where every person who comes for dinner, somebody in the family wants to give them a key and to formally adopt them into the family. Well, some members of the family are saying, wait, whoa, slow down. We're just having visitors over for dinner, and maybe we could adopt a child, but this is not something that we want to do in an uncontrolled fashion. Suddenly they're being told by the couple members of the family who want sky-high adoption inside of the family that these are bad people and that they're bigoted and et cetera, et cetera. Well, you're going to have an absolutely embittered, angry group of people who are saying, look, this is a home and we're generous people, but adoption, you're going to dilute all of us in some fashion. Well, this is a mirror of the national conversation. And what you're hearing is not the sanest, most grown-up voices who are representing a restrictionist position. You're getting the only people who are so incensed, I guess, in such a desensitized state that they're going to make terrible arguments for holding up borders or enforcing visas and not pushing everybody on a path towards citizenship. So that's really what's going on, is that you're seeing a very bad version of restrictionism in the White House because that's all that's been offered by the system. But what is the IDW? It's going to give you a completely different alternative. It's going to say, look, other cultures are super exciting. We're definitely going to have some immigration, and some of it's good for our country, some of it's good for the UK. But what is that level? Maybe that level should go up, maybe that level should go down. It has zero to do with xenophobia. It has to do with legitimate interests of a country, people not wanting to be diluted, people wanting to have something of their own culture that they can bring to the international potluck, and not being told that their substrate culture is somehow deficient and that every culture that's coming in should be held up and celebrated. I mean, that's pretty common sense. I don't understand in any way, shape, or form why we've gotten to a place where the only people who can sort of talk in public are either very far, jingoistic, far gone jingoistic restrictionists, or the tiny group of people in the IDW who are going to say, this doesn't make a lot of sense.
And you've described this as a civil war within the left. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. I mean, I think that the left that I relate to is the left that realizes that the past cannot supply the answers and that we have to actually progress because we can't stay here. It is not the left that believes we can wish ourselves into a beautiful future by pretending that the world is different than it actually is. So I think that the key thing that is an agreement between these two groups is that we have to get to some sort of better place, and that is the progressive in progressivism. Where we are deeply divided, and again, these are the divisions that is much worse than between left and right. How these absolutely imbecilic figures believe that you can just wish yourself into paradise, that you don't have to worry about markets, that you can just say, free good things for everybody. Well, it just doesn't make a whit of sense. Or, you're going to wish human beings to be both simultaneously non-diverse so that you can argue that any difference in pro rata shares of a group in any occupation is evidence of oppression. And then you're going to turn around and argue that people are actually incredibly different because we're going to get a huge benefit from diversity. I mean, this is not even self-consistent. This would be offensive to an intelligent 5-year-old. So I don't really believe that these progressives, as they call themselves, and regressives, as some of us call them, are even making serious intellectual points. They're sort of trolling by pretending to believe in all things that just gum up the works. And so it's very important to me that not only do we not really spend time debating people who are not serious in their intellectualism, but that we realize that it is important to the diversity of mature and important ideas that we not spend undue effort engaging ideas that are functioning very differently from regular conversation. It is as if somebody asks, should we have a diverse dinner tonight? Well, we could invite somebody from this position, from that country, from this gender, and then should we invite a suicide bomber? Well, if you're a suicide bomber, that bit of diversity is going to take down the entire conversation as well as all the people at the table, right? Well, these are like suicide bombers in terms of their ideas. They are attaching themselves to real conversations and blowing up the conversation so that you can't actually speak. And I think what we need to realize that the diversity of ideas that have to be explored hinges on not allowing in bad diversity. That is, you don't want a single person at the table who wants to scuttle the conversation. And that's not something that we've understood about the modern left. The modern left is very often focused on scuttling any realistic conversation so that it can continue to threaten and terrorize people into pretending to hold positions that no sane person could possibly hold.
Why do you think it's become like this?
Well, I think my wife probably has the best explanation, which is that when you're actually dependent on labor for your voter base, labor has economic issues. So this is the great search for something cheaper than labor. And identity turns out to be much cheaper than labor. If you can get somebody to vote for you where you're going to take their future, their security, and their retirement, but you're going to celebrate the fact that they came from Laos, that's a bad deal. Nothing against the Laotians, but for God's sake, stand up for yourself as a worker before you stand up for yourself as somebody who needs to see Southeast Asia celebrated on the national stage. It's not that exciting. Demand more from your representatives. This is the great search for the cheapest possible constituency. And that's exactly why I think it's happening. I think it's because the traditional Democratic voter base was too expensive. They wanted real change. They wanted to participate economically. They wanted to participate at the level of power. And the donor base said, isn't there anything cheaper than labor? And I think they found some.